All right. Thank you all for joining. This is another Certified Backyard Habitat Lunch and Learn. Today we are talking about eating the weeds. And again, my name is Nick Stallman. I am the wildlife habitat educator here at Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania. The program outline for today is we'll talk about what exactly a weed is briefly, and then we'll dive into the safety and ethics of foraging, especially foraging for weeds. And then we'll take a deep dive into four edible invasive plants. We'll talk about what invasive plants are. But the four plants that we'll really focus on are going to be garlic mustard, autumn olive, wineberry, and knotweed. And then at the end, I have a couple of resources to share. And of course, there will be plenty of time at the very end for questions. But if you have any throughout, just go ahead and unmute yourself. So first, we need to kind of talk about what a weed is. And there's a few different definitions. Title 7 of the United States Code, which is titled Agriculture, contains Section 136 within the subchapter on environmental pesticide control. And that is where you will find an official United States definition of a weed. And it is just any plant which grows where it's not wanted. Pretty straightforward. And you can also look at a very famous American essayist, lecturer, poet, abolitionist, leader of the transcendentalist movement in America, good old Ralph Waldo Emerson. He put it very poetically. This is actually in one of his last public addresses. It was delivered at the Old South Church in Boston, Massachusetts on March 30th, 1878. And in this, he says, "What is a weed, but a plant whose virtue have not been discovered?" So in his mind, sure, a weed might be a plant growing where it's not supposed to, but it might have some virtue to someone, to some instance. And so that is when we'll kind of get into a fun little story about what exactly a weed could be, because it is kind of subjective. There isn't necessarily a true definition, but here is Jerry. So Jerry is a turf manager of a golf course. And pretty much everything on this golf course that's not turf grass along the fairway to Jerry in his professional life is a weed. So anything that's growing there, it's part of Jerry's job to discourage weed growth and remove any weeds that do grow. They just want that nice, beautiful turf grass. So pretty much any other herbaceous plant is going to be a weed for Jerry at work. At home, Jerry does live in a community with an HOA, and he signed a contract to keep his front yard free of weeds, and the HOA defined weeds to include things like crabgrass, dandelions, some thistles. But he was also able to convince the HOA board that clover was acceptable. So his lawn is mostly clover and grass, and he was able to keep uh, stuff growing like that. But his backyard, he really actually does. Jerry loves native plants. So in his back, he's got himself a certified backyard habitat. It's full of over 100 native plant species. And really the only thing that he considers a weed back there are any non-native invasive species that pop up. So to him, in his backyard, weeds are things like garlic mustard or bush honeysuckle or knotweed. So he does take care of those things. Now, Jerry's neighbor, Terry, note you can tell the difference between the two because Terry has blue eyes, in case you were wondering. He's basically happy to see any plant growing in his backyard. He considers all of them equally acceptable, and he considers no plant in his backyard to be a weed, whether it's bush honeysuckle or a viburnum, native viburnum that pops up. He thinks everything is great. So in Terry's mind, there are no weeds. So a weed is very much, it's person to person, but not even just person to person. It's kind of setting to setting as well. So there isn't necessarily a complete all-encompassing definition. It's more or less, keep it simple, as a plant growing somewhere where someone doesn't want it at that time. Weeds do have some traits though. They're pretty good at spreading. So weedy plants are plants that will find their way into areas where you don't want them. And the way they do this is tends to be through natural dispersal mechanisms. Many weeds, such as dandelion, are very good at wind dispersal. Some dandelions are capable, like they've will blow a few yards, but some have actually been recorded to go over 50 miles if they catch the right air current. These seeds tend to be very small, some sort of wing or fluffy component to let them catch the wind and carry on. Some weedy plants will be air, like their seed pods are air filled, giving them a buoyant structure, letting them move down water pretty easily. Or they might have little hydrophobic hairs that keep the water off of it, keep the seed from getting saturated, and that way it can flow at the top of a creek or something and make it many, many miles downstream. And then a lot of weeds do produce tasty fruits or tasty seeds. And these seeds will oftentimes survive going through an animal's digestive tract, or in some cases, need to go through an animal's digestive tract to get scarified and get prepared to germinate. So birds are very good at spreading certain berries. As they eat the fleshy parts off, the seeds pass right through, they plop it out, and now you got a nice little bit of fertilizer alongside that seed, and that bird's carried it way further than the seed might have gone. Many seeds will be sticky. Either they have barbs or tiny little Velcro-like hairs that will attach to animals. The animals will track them on. Deer are really good at spreading certain things that are have sticky seeds. And other than natural dispersal, we tend to have some significant human influences. I mean, we are just as good of a vector for travel when it comes to seeds that are sticky. If you've ever walked through a field in the early morning, your boots are covered in seeds, especially things like Lespedeza or Desmodium. They're little Velcro-like seeds, and you will be covered in them. I swear you can almost feel the extra weight from these seeds. Trade has also kind of led to the spread of weeds. Um, Down in Knoxville, Tennessee, it was actually the epicenter for Japanese stiltgrass in escaped populations. And what it was believed to have been is a shipping crate that stiltgrass was used as the packing material. So dried stiltgrass was used and the crate fell off. It ended up on a place called Second Creek right off. It was a tributary of Tennessee River. And by the time one of the botanists at University of Tennessee had found it, it had actually established a nice little plot on Second Creek. So packing material before plastics included things like dried grass, as well as fine china was actually packed in things like royal paulownia seeds, which are tiny, tiny seeds of a very invasive tree. Agriculture can lead to introduction of invasive species. Some things like ryegrasses out in Northern California have escaped fields and created nice monocultures. And other times they were used for erosion control and they kind of escaped. They led to not so great erosion control, and especially in Northern California, some of these ryegrasses have actually proven to be quite good as fuel. So they contribute to some of the wildfires. Another way that weeds spread is because we put them there. Some of these exotic plants are nice, pretty landscaping features, whether they have bright foliage, bright berries, what have you, that made us want to plant them in our yards, in our in front of our libraries, in front of buildings. We'll put them out there, and bushes like barberry are gonna have a nice, attractive foliage, nice red berries for winter interest. But those berries can be taken into the woods, will spread like crazy. Not much eats it and becomes quite invasive in some settings that would be considered a weed. Now, that begs the question, are weeds invasive plants? Well, during this researching this program, I came across this picture on Wikimedia. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized this is an absolutely awesome photo because this is, let me put up the laser pointer. We have a field of Canada goldenrod right here, or a patch rather. And right next to it is some miscanthus or Japanese silvergrass. Now, Japanese silvergrass is a very invasive plant. Canada goldenrod is native to Southwest PA. It's awesome. It's not a cause of allergies unless you walk right up to it and go, and maybe then you'll get some sneezes. The pollen is too big to be carried by the wind, so it doesn't cause seasonal allergies. This is an insect pollinated plant, but it does come out the same time as ragweed, which ragweed will cause allergies. Now we've got Canada goldenrod, awesome native plant, and then some of this Japanese silvergrass, which can escape a lot of our ornamental grass plantings, becomes quite invasive, especially in lowland areas. But here's the thing. This is in Japan, where Canada goldenrod is highly invasive, and Japanese silvergrass, or this miscanthus species, is native and belongs here. So weeds can be invasive plants. They tend to have the same traits. Invasive plants are really good at spreading, getting beyond where they should be, but it's all subjective to where we are. So Canada goldenrod could be a weed to some people in Southwest PA just because they don't want it growing there, but it is a very beneficial native plant. However, when it gets out of this native plant community, it can become quite weedy and quite invasive. So in Japan, Canada goldenrod is quite invasive. In the UK, Canada goldenrod is quite invasive. And it's Japanese silvergrass does have some natural competitors, so it doesn't quite spread like it does here in its native range. So weeds, basically plants growing where they're not wanted. Noxious weeds is a designation that's assigned by some sort of governing authority, usually something tied to agriculture, like a Department of Agriculture for any given state. And the plants that have the noxious weed status have been deemed capable of economical, ecological, or human harm, meaning it outgrows ag fields and competes with crops, or it is destroying parts of a national forest system, or it's toxic. Just by brushing up against giant hogweed, you might break out in blisters that are exposed to sun. Invasive plants are very similar. These will always have the added thing of being introduced. So these are introduced non-native plants. So wherever they came from, it's not. So if it's North America, the plant came from most likely East Asia and was brought here and then spread beyond that initial site. So just because it's not native doesn't mean it's going to be invasive. It could just be content growing where it is. But if it spreads beyond that and then is also capable of oftentimes ecological harm by impacting native plant species or native organism, native biological communities, it's going to be quite detrimental. All right. So, any questions on invasive plants or weeds in general? So, it should be as clear as mud. Is was my goal. All right. So, we'll kind of talk about foraging then. Foraging is a term that you can use for both humans and animals. So when deer are browsing around for food, it's considered foraging. When bears are out looking for food, foraging. Insects, you could tie foraging to that. So sometimes people will say wild crafting when it's humans that are foraging, just to put that distinction. You can call it foraging. This is a practice of harvesting plants from the wild, and it could be for food or for medicines. And I'm seeing this more and more become such a popular pastime, especially. I think there was a little bit of resurgence with connecting with the natural world during COVID because you didn't have much choice to do anything else. So, kind of getting re in touch with nature in your own personal way has led to a lot of people seeing foraging as a way to sustainably obtain their own food. But you do need to kind of have some ethics about this, and safety should always be top in mind. So, we'll kind of go through some safe and ethical foraging things. And with the beginning here, I just kind of want to tell three stories on three different, well, two plants and one fungus. So this is ginseng, American ginseng in particular. If you buy ginseng as a supplement, those are primarily coming from farms in Wisconsin and Ontario, Canada. American ginseng root is harvested and it's usually in the southern Appalachians, but really any part of the Appalachian range you might get this. And it's fresh roots can sell for like over $150 a pound. Dried, we're talking like $400 plus a pound. And these are generally going to East Asia markets where the native ginseng in those areas has declined significantly and it's become quite a rare commodity. So these are often sold overseas. Now, because it's a root, this is a hard thing to harvest. I mean, you're digging up, you could be disturbing other plant communities. So if you're just digging up one or two, you're being mindful about it, great. But this can be a practice that leads to a lot of over harvesting that not just impacts the ginseng population in a harvested area, but the surrounding plant communities. As people go into trample, as things are dug up, you're hitting the roots of other organisms nearby, and um, basically, like, someone could come in and within just a couple of hours remove something that took years to grow. So always think about like how much you're taking. Do I need all this? Is this the proper way to harvest something in this area? What else is nearby? In areas like American ginseng, that in the southern Appalachians, you have a lot of spring ephemeral and other rare flowers growing, ferns and mosses that are unique to the area. Another story to kind of consider is this is a mushroom. So this is called hemlock varnish cap. Ganoderma mushrooms are also known as reishi. So it's dried and consumed for like immunological benefits or added to other ideas of like Eastern medicine to just kind of promote a better overall well-being. So reishi is a highly sought after species. Reishi in in Eastern cultures, it's Ganoderma lucidum, and sometimes it will be like farmed. But one species is native to Eastern North America called Ganoderma sugae, and this grows on hemlocks, and it is fairly similar to Ganoderma lucidum or the true reishi mushroom. So it's harvested for those same benefits. It has a lot of the same chemicals that are thought to be the beneficial chemicals within the fungus. And harvesting this mushroom when it's too young removes the spores from the environment. So you're reducing the chances of more spores coming on. Improperly harvesting this, like just going up and ripping it, could rip off barks of the hemlock tree and exposing it to disease. And the hemlocks are already under attack by a couple of different insect parasites, including hemlock woolly adelgid and elongate hemlock scale, both of which just weaken hemlocks over time. So opening the bark tissue up, exposing it to infection could lead to a quicker death. Now, some of these are just growing on dead trees. So the hemlock's already dead or it's dying. The other thing to consider with this, though, is fungi, just like a lot of plants, are really good at taking up contaminants in the environment and kind of sequestering toxins. In these forests with hemlock woolly adelgid and elongate hemlock scale, if it is public land or managed forest, there's a good chance that these trees are being treated with systemic pesticides. Systemic insecticides will be taken up by the roots of the tree, injected into the soil, so it's taken up, and it's going to be throughout the tissue of the tree. And so there's a good chance that the hemlock would be taking up these pesticides and sequestering them. So if you're harvesting this, you have to be mindful, what is the land use currently for this area? Do they treat all these trees with the systemic insecticides? Um, do you see a lot of spray paint on the trees marking them? If they're being marked, there's a good chance they're being treated. So you always want to kind of think about what is going on in the area before you harvest this stuff for consumption. This program was kind of developed to talk about eating invasive plants in particular. One that you can eat is multifloral rose. Now, this is a non-native and invasive shrub. It can outcompete and displace native herbaceous and woody plants, kind of eventually dominating the understory of the area. The abundant flowers have a varied fragrance. You can take a handful from one shrub and it smells really good. Go to the next one and it's like, I don't know. But you can eat them raw. They're really good in salads or topped on desserts, adding a nice little feature. They can be candied, added to honeys or teas or wines. The young leaves are also pretty tasty. Nice addition to a salad, pretty abundant. And the seeds or the fruits here. So roses produce a fruit called rose hips. Uh, I think they're pretty tasty. It's just the right amount of sweet right after the first frost. They're a bit more seedy than some of the rose hips that you might see from a garden, but they're still packed with vitamin C. Now, this sounds like something, it's an invasive plant, so let's go out and harvest everything, right? The problem is if you're in an area where it is just multifloral rose, and you go through and you harvest all of these rose hips or all of these flowers, that's really the only food that was available for the wildlife in the area. Sure, the multifloral rose isn't going to be the best thing. Native plants are better, sure. I 100% agree. But if this is the only thing in that specific area, it's the only food source for the wildlife, we really need to consider not taking everything. Just because it's invasive doesn't mean we need to take everything. And also, if we're taking it, we need to be mindful about where it's going it. Because if I take the rose hips from one area and not very careful with my basket, and some of these fall through, did I just spread multifloral rose to a new area? Or if I was like, you know what, I grabbed too many, I'm just going to throw these in my compost. They're going to be viable seeds. So you got to be mindful about harvesting invasive plants. If it's the only thing there, doesn't mean you should take everything. And we don't want to spread more of these plants. All right, so some things to consider real quick. Harvest only what you need. This is the big thing. A lot of the stuff doesn't last very long. So it's going to go bad if you don't use it right away, but also wildlife need this. Ruffed grouse are eating those same berries. Chipmunks are eating those same berries. Wildlife need this things, so try only to take what you need. And before you go out to an area, always know and respect the laws. Can I harvest here? Um, just from like going to a Pennsylvania state forest to a national forest, there's going to be different foraging laws. There might be complete restrictions, especially in things like national parks tend to have high, like you can't forage anything, but there are some, like the Great Smoky Mountains, when that became a national park, there were some reparations to allow for a certain amount of harvesting and foraging to be done within the national park land. So just look up on the website or contact a ranger or employee for the area. And if they say you can't forage, do respect that. Um, and then always be mindful of land use and potential contaminants. So on this screen here, we have chicory. This is commonly seen growing late summer. Young leaves are full of nutrients, can also be added to salads or cooked to remove some of that bitterness, much like dandelion greens. The root can also be harvested. So you can dig this up. This is a non-native plant. It's kind of more considered naturalized than invasive, but anyway, you could dig this up, dry it, and it becomes kind of a caffeine-free coffee-like alternative. You'll actually find some coffee makers that still sell like a chicory coffee mixture. Um, so you could harvest this, you could eat it. However, it tends to grow near roads. So anything that's by the road is going to be sprayed with any like exhaust fumes. There might be some oil, other roadside pollutants, can be high in road salt. So it's probably not best to harvest near a roadside or an area like this that might be sprayed or sprayed with herbicides. You should also never test something for the first time in the field, and your initial portion should always be small. Just because it is a great, awesome, amazing, full of nutrients, forageable food, and you read everywhere that it's the best thing ever, doesn't mean that you aren't allergic to it. So, allergies can be very specific to each individual. So, always just be prepared that you might be allergic to something. So, always try small portions. And then you can, with allergies for these foods, it can be any amount of symptoms. So just never try it out in the field. I know a lot of my friends are not good about that, and they've had some close calls trying something new and then having their throat kind of swell up. So it's not worth it. Also, just if you're harvesting invasive plants or non-native plants in general, don't just throw the stuff in compost. Like we'll talk about knotweed, and you're going to be removing parts of the knotweed before you consume it. Don't just take all that and throw it in your compost pile, because with knotweed in particular, I swear you could take a little tiny fragment of that thing, throw it out, and it's going to grow brand new plant from it. So you do need to kill this stuff if you're going to try to compost it. So you could boil it. Some of the things like autumn olive, which we'll talk about, making a jelly out of it, and the seeds, if, as long as they've been simmered for a long time, those seeds are no longer viable. So at that point, sure, you can probably compost it. Otherwise, you need to bag this stuff up and dispose of it in the trash. Other thing to really, really highly always consider, you have to be sure of your identification. So on this, we have two different plants that are fairly similar. You've got the super delicious, awesome, edible grapevine and the super toxic, not tasty moonseed. So just from afar, the leaves are going to be fairly similar shaped. The berries are definitely going to be fairly similar if you don't know what to look for. So you need to be confident with your ID. And a lot of these field guides will use terminology, and I really like this book, Plant Identification Terminology. This is actually one of the first like plant books I bought, and it just goes through and it has some nice photo or nice illustrations for each of the weird terms that you see, whether it's something like alternate or opposite, or things like ovate or chordate, and it just really kind of explains what each of these things are. So know your terminology, know what to look for on any toxic plants, because another thing to consider, you got to be sure of your identification. So for instance, you might go out and harvest this plant on the left, and you got yourself some nice delicious carrots, and you could even make some delicious jellies on it. But if you weren't paying attention and you picked the one on the right instead, you could end up just like Socrates and die of hemlock poisoning. So Socrates famously chose his own death, and it was actually a beverage made from poison hemlock, which is the plant on the right. This plant on the left is Queen's Anne's lace, also known as wild carrot, and is a harvestable plant. So you got to know your identification traits between these two so you don't make a mistake. Finally, one last thing to consider: be sure of your identification before you put this stuff in your mouth. One way you can kind of get more knowledgeable on this kind of stuff is go out with foragers. There was a group, should still be active, Foraging Pittsburgh. You can check them out. There's some nice YouTube tutorials. Just try to like learn from people that are confident in this and have been doing it for a long time. And you want to pick up those traits. But at the end of the day, only you can properly ID a plant. So don't trust someone else's opinion, or if they hand you something like, oh, yeah, you can eat that. You have to be sure. Okay. Other people can make mistakes. You have to be sure too. So it's always good to know this stuff, because there are some things that can be quite toxic, because sometimes it's just an upset stomach. Sometimes it's a bit worse. I'm not trying to scare anyone away from this, but you should always go out mindful and prepared to properly identify something. All right, so about halfway in, and we're gonna start taking a deep dive into the four species. Up first, we have garlic mustard. Now, what is it? Well, it is an herbaceous, cool season biennial, meaning the first year the plant appears as just kind of a rosette, a flat on the ground arrangement of leaves. These leaves remain green throughout that winter, and then the plant matures the following spring when the flowers and seeds are produced. This is in the family Brassicaceae. This is also known as the mustard family. Flowers in this family are known to have just four petals that are arranged in kind of a cross shape. And this family actually used to be called cruciferae, or like crucifer, so cross. And vegetables in this family are known as cruciferous vegetables, things like Brussels sprout and cabbage and garden cress. Now, garlic mustard, though, is neither a garlic, which is in the genus Allium, nor a mustard, which is the genus Brassica. Allium is actually a different family entirely, but Brassica is pretty closely related to garlic mustard. So how did it get here? Well, this was a plant that was native to Europe and Asia and even parts of northern Africa. So it had a pretty extensive range. but it was brought over to North America in the 1800s for cuisine because it was used as a food, like a, it was used as an additive throughout all those areas. Now, it was first recorded as kind of escaping and doing its own thing in 1868 in Long Island. How is it invasive? Well, it develops rapidly and it's very, very shade tolerant, which means it can expand or it can start growing deep into the forests at the edges, and it's also a very prolific seeder. There's like up to 8,000 seeds per plant, which translates to 260,000 seeds per square mile of an infested area. And these seeds, they remain viable for like 10 years. So if they hit the soil and they don't germinate, they could still have 10 more years to hit those right conditions to germinate. It's also very unpalatable to deer, so deer do not touch it. So if it's not getting eaten, it can just keep on spreading, which is why it can be quite bad. As a shade tolerant species, it is a shady invader. So you can end up with areas like this where you have partial to closed canopy forest that should have some nice shrub understory or understory trees or some really awesome forest low species of flowers. You don't. You just get garlic mustard. And one of the reasons is this can be allelopathic, which means that it's actually putting chemicals in the soil that make it harder for other plants that aren't garlic mustard to grow. So it changes the soil chemistry, and it actually changes it enough to affect the what we call ectomycorrhizal fungi. So these are the fungi that attach to root systems of trees and other plants to help them grow very, very well. It can actually impede the development of the ectomycorrhizal fungi. So in areas where you have a lot of garlic mustard, you actually have less seed, like sapling trees forming. There are also two species of butterfly that confuse garlic mustard for their native host plant, which are toothworts in the cardamine genus, and they're confused enough to lay their eggs on it, but the larvae don't develop because the plant is toxic to them. This includes the mustard white butterfly and the imperiled West Virginia white butterfly. So it can actually lead to population declines in areas where garlic mustard is super high. And then again, because it's unpalatable from deer, there's really no herbivores eating this. So it just spreads and spreads and spreads. How do you ID it? Well, for the leaves in the first year, you've got that nice rosette of these kidney shaped leaves. They're kind of scalloped, almost wrinkly. And they also have these nice toothed margins. And then the stem is very smooth, green, and then slightly ridged if you looked really close. And when the seeds develop, you actually have these pods called calyx that extend off of the stem at multiple points. And the flowers themselves, again, we have those four petals arranged in a cross shape. They're white, they're small, but they're clustered. So wherever you have one, you have multiple. And if you were to dig this up, the root actually has it's a tap root, and there's a very um, distinct S shape to that tap root. You could confuse this with a few different things, but it's going to have a very distinct smell. So if you were to crush this leaf, it has that like garlicky smell to it. One of the ones that will easily get you confused are wild violets. So things in the viola species or the viola genus. The leaf veins, though, are pretty diagnostic. So on wild violets, you almost have this arcuate or like arcing leaf vein pattern here. Whereas on garlic mustard, it's netted, it's reticulate with these deep veins kind of in the middle, and then all these netted connections in between. And it gives it this like wrinkly shape. That's going to be the biggest thing because garlic mustard, again, you have that smell to the crushed leaves. So how do you eat it? Well, what you're looking for is, well, what I look for is the harvest, the second year stalks just before the flowers blossom. So just before you see those white flowers starting to burst from their buds, that's when I collect these. This wilts very quickly though, so just harvest what you plan to use right away. And what I like is I actually go for the stem more than anything else. So I'll remove a lot of the leaves and I chop the stems up finely. This is great in salads. Spread a little bit onto soups, or you can add it as a stir fry ingredient. You could add it to different sauces. I'll just throw it in some pasta sauce. The leaves and the flower buds are also edible too. It's a bit more of a strong taste, can be off-putting to some folks. It's much more garlicky and it's kind of got that sinus effect, but it does make a really nice pesto. So if you just take the basil leaves out of your favorite pesto recipe and use the garlic mustard from that second year kind of fresh growth, it's pretty good. You can eat older plants, but they can have a very overwhelming taste. You have to really cook these. You could also you could boil it, strain out that water, and then boil it again to reduce the flavor if you're harvesting older plants. Um, yeah, so I just really like that stem. It's very, very tasty. It's got just the right amount of flavor. And the seeds will also be useful. So if you didn't harvest it in time and it's gone to seed, you can also make a delicious mustard, but boy, is it a spicy mustard. So you want to be careful because these saliques are actually kind of explosive. So when you touch them, they break open and they shatter the seeds all over the place. So you got to be prepared to try not to spread more of these seeds out into the environment because, again, 10-year viability. So if you do go to harvest these, you want to look for once the stalks and those pods have become straw colored, but they haven't broken open yet. And if you go over with a nice bucket, some scissors, you can kind of clip the stalks with the seed heads off into the buckets. They'll kind of shatter as they're hitting the bottom of that hard surface. And then from there, you can separate the seeds from the chaff. You can just get a nice colander or sieve and throw the chaff in there. It's one of the easier things to separate. And then just dry those, let them sit on a paper towel for a day or so, let it dry out, and then just grind those up. And this mustard recipe is actually the one that you'll find a lot of different mustard recipes online. This is one that I had experimented with. It's just the basic, and from here, you can kind of modify it as needed. So if you have certain things that you like in your mustard, you can just add a little bit each time. But this is the general recipe that I had used originally from Three Foragers. But it's just some garlic mustard seeds, a little bit of apple cider, some salt, and then water. And then I throw a pinch of turmeric in there. But it is delicious. I highly recommend if you have some garlic mustard that's gone to seed, if you can carefully harvest some of these, it's a pretty tasty thing. All right, so up next we have autumn olive. This is a deciduous shrub. Sometimes it's a bit more of a small tree. Now, with that small tree, it means it has like a single stalk from it. The family is the oleaster family. These are just known to have kind of scales or thorns coming off of them, and they're speckled. This one's kind of funny. I saw this book as I was doing some of the research here. It's So this plant was native to Eastern Asia, and it was brought over as an ornamental shrub because it's got some nice foliage, it's got some beautiful berries, and then it was purposefully planted in a lot of natural areas. In fact, I found this book from the Department of Agriculture. This was published in 1963. So this is Russian olive. So it's a adjacent genus, a species rather, to autumn olive, but very similar. But it's Russian olive for wildlife and other conservation uses. So Russian olive is also just as invasive, but this was a nice little pamphlet put out by the Department of Agriculture on why you should be planting Russian olive everywhere and how it's so great for wildlife and conservation in general. So this autumn olive and Russian olive were both planted in a lot of wildlife management areas and by soil conservationists. And this was as late as like 1980s. It was used for erosion control to establish quick windbreaks, and it was premier wildlife food. Unfortunately, it's also really, really invasive. So how So it develops very rapidly for a shrub. And part of the reason why is it can fix nitrogen. So it can take atmospheric nitrogen and convert it to nitrogen that could be used in the soil, and which leads to rapid growth and early and abundant fruit production. So they can make berries as or fruits as early as like 3 years from sprouting, and our native shrubs it's more like 5 to 7 years. And the berries are quite tasty, so a lot of different animals will use them, eat them, and spread those seeds all over the place. Why is it bad though? Well, that nitrogen fixing sounds like it could be good because you're putting nitrogen in a usable form into the soil, but a lot of the places that autumn olive grows, which are these large fields that tend to have infertile soils, the plant communities in those fields were adapted to those infertile soils. So by adding too much nitrogen to that environment, it actually makes it so those plants can't grow. And so it alters plant communities, and it also, as it grows quickly, changes the shade component in those areas. So things underneath autumn olive aren't getting the amount of sunlight that they need. And even though the berries are super tasty and everything likes to eat them, they're not that nutritious. So a lot of birds are filling up on things that don't quite have the nutrients that they need. And with comparing it to like native plants, sure, autumn olive has some good antioxidants in it, but it just is lacking in the proteins and the fats that we see in a lot of our other native shrubs. Identifying this guy is pretty easy. If you haven't seen it, I'd start to look for it on the landscape, especially if you frequent anywhere with big fields. The leaves are kind of elongate and they have silvery scales to them. So they're two-toned, green above, white below. And if you looked close, you'll see these little silvery scales all over the leaf. And you'll actually see those all over the twig. So it's just speckled throughout. And the flowers make they're these kind of cream-colored trumpet-shaped flowers that cluster together and lead to these abundant berry productions. And the berries themselves are bright red, but they're speckled as well. So it'll either be kind of that same silver or almost gold speckling all over the berries. So speckled berries is a big key identifier. What could you confuse this with? Well, that Russian olive that I mentioned, the leaves and the twigs will be very similar. The flowers are a bit more yellow, but the berries are pale. They're also not nearly as tasty. They're very mealy. They're quite gross, and they just don't look appetizing. So in the end, once you actually have the berries, it's pretty easy to tell these two apart. You could confuse this with bush honeysuckle. Bush honeysuckle will not have any of the speckling though. So the leaves are going to be a bit broader, wider, but there will be no speckling on the leaves or the twigs or the berries. And the berries are much more water filled. If you crushed a bush honeysuckle berry, it just pops. Autumn olive has a bit thicker skin. The one I'd kind of be worried about is winterberry. So this is a native holly, and the leaves are completely different. Again, there's no speckling anywhere, but just be mindful for the ID traits of autumn olive, because if you were to eat winterberry, it is poisonous. It's not going to kill you, but it will make you quite nauseous. Could lead to hospitalization, but it's pretty easy to tell them apart as long as you know to look for that speckling and all the other traits. So how do you eat it? Well, I love these things raw, but honestly, this is not everyone's favorite. It varies in ripeness too. It can go from like somewhat tart from one plant to very sweet on the other. It's just a wide variety. I personally love these things raw though. I'll eat them by the handful or just grab like a bunch and put them in yogurt or my cereal. They are seedy though, so you kind of have to enjoy that. I think that it adds a nice little crunch, especially to a salad. It's just the perfect amount. And the seeds are edible, so it's not something that you have to worry about eating. But you could also make a nice little blended drink with these. So you'll take like half a cup or so and a little bit of lemon juice, and then just blend that up, add a sweetener. I just use honey, and it tastes pretty good. But everyone's favorite is the jam. If you haven't had autumn olive jam, I highly recommend it. If I've not made it, I've had people give it to me, and I've was so grateful when that happens because it is superb. I'm not good at making jam, so I've never really tried myself, but you can find a lot of recipes online. Again, autumn olive jam is delicious. There was actually a gentleman who was trying to start an initiative to get rid of autumn olive by trying to convince people that it has the best flavored jam ever and would teach people how to make it in hopes that they would go out and harvest all the berries and put a dent in this. Now, is eating these invasives going to make them go away? Probably not. It doesn't hurt as long as people aren't trying to take them home and grow their own in their backyard. That's what you do want to avoid. One thing I have made though is fruit leather. I'd help making this though. I'm not the most skilled. So this one though is kind of like the fruit roll-ups, and so I actually followed a recipe from this 1 acre farm, and you just grab a few cups of berries and add them all to a big pot with a little bit of water, and you just kind of keep it on a simmer, constantly turning them and mashing them. Like I was just using a potato masher, or if you have one of those wood mashers, you just kind of keep mashing these things, stirring them around until you have this nice puree. And then they used a food mill to separate the seeds. I do not have one of those, so I just sat there very frustratingly with a strainer over a bowl, separating the seeds and the skin and pushing through the nice juices. And then after you've kind of separated out the seeds, you add just a little bit of sweetener. So you can add sugar, you can add whatever you want. Again, just a little bit of honey. And you spread that into a dehydrator tray that's used for fruit leather. So it's kind of like a big, like a plastic thing that you put on the dehydrator, keep it on for about 10 hours up to a day until it's just not as tacky. And then you can kind of roll it up. I like to roll it up just because it reminds me of the fruit roll ups I used to get as a kid. And some people will just kind of leave these things out. I've always been told to put them in the freezer if you're not going to eat them right away. They can still spoil. All right, but I do love this one. So again, this was our 1 acre farm recipe that I had done. So they were calling it autumn berry, but this is the autumn olive fruit leather. So that was autumn olive. I am more lazy and just kind of grab them raw off the uh, bush, put them in my fridge. I'm adding them to uh, cereal and yogurt throughout the fall. All right, the next one is a pretty simple one because this is wineberry. This is a deciduous shrub again, also known as wine raspberry. So it is in the family Rosaceae, which is a very diverse family, so it doesn't mean much. There's like 5,000 different species across almost 100 different genera, but it is in the Rubus genus, which is the same genus as our other brambles like blackberry and raspberry, or if you're out on the West Coast, salmonberry. And it got here, it was, you guessed it, from Eastern Asia. And it was actually introduced to both Europe and North America in the late 1800s as a way to hybridize other blackberries and raspberries. It was a way to add in some nice new genes. It is actually still used as a hybrid stock today, but it is a noxious weed in several Northeast states. And it's a species on the watch list in Pennsylvania. And just, I've only been in Pennsylvania for a little over 2 years now. And when I did CBH in 2023, or the Backyard Habitat visits in 2023, I didn't see a lot of wineberry. And in those same areas in 2024, I actually saw a bunch of wineberry. So it is spreading. It's very prevalent in the South too. How is it invasive? Well, it grows very vigorously and densely, and the berries are quite tasty, which translates to animals are eating it and spreading those seeds. It's also very good at vegetative growth. So as it grows, you can either have, and this is kind of how rubus grows in general, but you can either have root suckers. So you have on these roots here, there's little nodes that'll send up a new cane. And the first year cane, its main goal is to grow and grow and put out leaves. and bring in resources. It's that second year flowering cane that'll produce the berries. But this first year cane is going to grow, 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 and sometimes it'll actually fall over, and the tip of that cane can hit the ground and root and put out a little daughter plant. So it has a couple of ways to do vegetative growth. And what that means, why it's bad, is it's quite an indiscriminate invader, meaning it will pose a threat to almost any environment. I've seen this grow deep in a forest, on wet soil, on dry soil, next to water. It's very, very adaptive. So it can spread in, and it's just like a lot of the other rubus. So, like our native blackberries, you'll see growing all over. And it is going to create a dense thicket, a very thick thicket. And it will make it so that wildlife have a harder time going in, but it's also shading out some of the native things there. And then those canes, those colossal canes, they grow a lot bigger than our native rubus. And in fact, some of the canes in the first year can reach 9 feet in height. And if that's the one that's going to flop over and root to send out a daughter plant, it just spread itself 9 feet away. So it's very good at taking over an area with that vegetative growth. It's also been known to be a viral vector. Things like wineberry latent virus, which causes some spotting, will actually transfer to other rubus species. So it can harbor these viruses that our native ones aren't used to. This one's fairly easy to ID. It's got these crazy little red furs that look like spines. It does have prickles though. So you'll like go to touch one spot and it's like, oh, that's not too hard at all. It's actually kind of soft. And then you'll stab yourself on one of these hooked prickles. So it does have prickles like our native black raspberries, but it's also got all these red glandular hairs covering it. So that is a very, very good ID. It's also got two-toned leaves that are compound. So you have three leaflets and green above, white below. And it's very, very obvious in the field. So you've got all this red fur and these two-tone leaves, and it's really hard to confuse this with anything else. You could confuse it with purple flowering raspberry, which is our native raspberry. And the leaves are a lot different. So this is not going to be a compound leaf on the purple flowering raspberry. We do have a compound leaf here with those three leaflets. But purple flowering raspberry does have some of this red fur. It does not have prickles though. And the red fur is not nearly as evident, as obvious as it is on wineberry. So keep an eye out for the two, but in the end, purple flowering raspberry is edible. I don't like the taste of it. I think that it's an absolutely beautiful plant. It's great for erosion control. It's super awesome. I'm talking about purple flowering raspberry. If you have a shady spot that you need some stuff to grow in, love this plant. I don't think that it tastes that great. Wineberry, on the other hand, oh boy, how do you eat this? You eat this raw, just like any other like blackberry or raspberry. It's so good. Um, you can add it to whatever you would normally use blackberries or raspberries or salmon berries for. But I will let you guys in on my secret wineberry recipe. So you just grab one handful and you eat it. And then you grab another handful and you eat it. And then if you're still peckish, grab one last handful. Again, I really like this berry. All right, our last one here, Japanese knotweed. I think most are familiar with this herbaceous perennial. It is the invasive plant poster child. It is basically on every continent but Antarctica, and it's in a family called Polygonaceae. It's for a genus called Polygonum, but this family has other things that are kind of considered weedy, like docks, and smartweeds, and other knotweeds. It got here from, you guessed it, it's native to Eastern Asia. It was introduced in the 1800s, and it was for ornamental purposes as well as it was used for privacy, and it's pretty good at that. And then it was also used as erosion control in the late 1800s. It is invasive because it grows vigorously and densely, creating these monocultures that shade and outcompete everything else there. And they have these insanely hardy rhizomes, which are horizontal stem-like structures that grow just below the ground. And these rhizomes can spread like 20 feet from the original parent plant. And those broken stems, both the rhizome and the stems themselves, can root again. And to some extent, they're spread by seeds being carried down by wind or water. But sometimes it's just the plant themselves or the bank collapsing and rhizome chunks getting washed down that spread it more. It can quickly form these dense stands, and it actually increases erosion despite its use as erosion control, especially on riparian areas or near banks. So, in an area like this, you should have trees, both tall and understory trees. You should have shrubs, and you should have herbaceous stuff. And what that means is you have a huge network of different size roots all keeping this soil bank together and keeping it from collapsing. But if all you have is knotweed, which does not have the most extensive root system, holding it in kind of a uniform root diameter, this is not going to stabilize the area. And so you will have massive bank collapses where knotweed is, or you will have mudslides where knotweed was the only thing growing on the hillside. So it is not good for erosion control. There's a lot of science that shows that it's not. So these quick stands take away all the native stuff, and the increased erosion can lead to impacts on the water quality in these areas. If you aren't already familiar with this, this is one that you should try to get familiar with. You'll start to see it all over the place, but we have smooth purple to green colored stalks that look a lot like bamboo, but they're much more soft and they're hollow on the inside. So if you pluck them, they're kind of make a nice satisfying popping sound, but you can see that they're hollow on the inside. Couple that with oval to triangular shaped leaves, and the leaves alternate on these stems that kind of form a zigzag pattern. So kind of a zigzag is a good key. Then you have these spikes of white flowers that produce seeds. You could confuse this with bamboo, but bamboo is going to have much harder structure. It's going to grow a lot taller. It's more grass-like leaf, so the leaf is completely different. And then I would also just be mindful of poison hemlock. Like you have to really not be paying attention to get these two confused. But poison hemlock does have this smooth stem that has some purple to it. It will not have the nodes that's uh, useful when IDing knotweed, and it has much more lacy fern-like foliage versus the triangular leaf of knotweed. All right, so as far as eating this, um, just a couple notes. This is high in oxalic acid, so if you avoid that for kidney stone reasons, like you're avoiding spinach or rhubarb, I probably would not eat this. Sorry, the photo is garlic mustard on this one. My apologies. But I don't actually have personal experience with this one yet. This is something I'm going to be trying out this year, but I'm very curious about it. But this is also one that you have to be extra mindful of your harvest area. This is a species that is treated quite quickly by all sorts of agencies and personal landowners. So just be aware of whether or not they sprayed herbicide in the area. But what you're actually looking for is the young shoots. They're the tasty parts. Tasty is subjective, but it's supposed to be kind of like a lemony rhubarb. And it can have a bit of a mucusy component, a little bit like okra as you're cooking it, but it has this compound resveratrol or resveratrol. This is the polyphenol plant compound that's actually like in red wine and is supposed to have all these amazing, awesome human benefits. It does help protect the plant against pathogens, and it's been touted to help with reducing heart disease risk and prolonging your lifespan. There's a lot of conflicting reports on the research for this, but it does show signs of slowing down Alzheimer's symptoms and increasing the effectiveness of insulin in diabetics. So there is some promise to this compound, but knotweed is a source for it. So you would actually harvest these young shoots early in the spring. That's like April to May up here. So pretty soon you'll be seeing these little reddish guys popping out. And as far as what you're supposed to do is you just kind of cut these young shoots when they're about 1 to 2 feet tall and they've got that reddish papery sheets near the joints. You want to remove all that stuff on the outside. You're kind of peeling away all the fibrous exterior and then you chop it up. So these shoots, after you've chopped up, you will cook them, or What I love to do with everything is, and I'm excited for, is pickling. So they're supposed to taste really good pickled. Otherwise, you can kind of blend them up as a puree. They can be used as a rhubarb alternative if you have any recipes for that. But I'm actually really curious if any of you all have tried this yet. I just recently found out that knotweed was edible, and I'm very excited to try it out. So if anyone's tried it already, I'd love to hear. As far as resources, I enjoyed this book a lot. I've had it for a couple years now. It's Eat the Weeds, Forager's Guide. It's a very well written book, very easy to digest, but also has fun like nutritional info on everything and a little bit of the natural history on all these different plants. But there's a lot of different plants in this one. And then again, if you're just now getting into kind of plant ID, I did really enjoy this book when I first got into it. So this will set you on the right track of understanding all those weird terms that you get in your plant field guides. If you're looking for just a foraging book, I highly recommend checking out your local library. There's a lot of great foraging books out there, and you can just see what there are available at your library because there's probably some good ones. The information doesn't change that much, so just go check out what you can find. There is a lot of stuff online too, especially YouTube videos and all that, but I am a big fan of all the different field guide books.